So while I pull this up, I'm going to sort of start with um, sort of demystifying some of the hype. There are two camps, right? Currently, actually, there are three camps. Currently, with this AI craziness, one camp is an accelerationist sort of mindset that says things like fairness or bias are solvable problems. What the real problems are, you know, eh, like any problem that we can sort of throw at AI, we can solve with AI. It's just this magical silver bullet that can solve the problems. And so this, anyone who's talking about frameworks to help clean your data and protect it from bias or train your model to eliminate potential bias is just a waste of time. So that's one perspective. Another perspective, and I'm going to share it here in a second. Another perspective is that the world is on fire, right? Like, they call them the doomers. It's like, there's an existential risk and there's a probability of doom that depending on which of these doomers you talk to is like 90%, we're all going to die. And so just, pause the AI thing. And then there's my camp, I would call it, just the pragmatic kind of mindset. I'm just the tool's been already released, right? And so I just want to sort of systematically go through a thoughtful conversation as to how these tools can do right by my people, by my community. And I have spent a lot of my time within the last 2 years working at places like at USDA to help introduce some data governance to how SNAP food stamp programs are disseminated and try to steer them away from this automated approval process that, if you've ever heard of it, should frighten anyone, right? And by that I mean, if there is no human in the loop, I loved how you said that, right? That brings this notion that this AI thing, again, silver bullet, can sort of solve it for us, which again isn't nuanced. There's some areas and some opportunities for AI where, in my personal opinion, at this moment, AI is not needed. Things like judicial decisions, the old um, recidivism or is this person going to reoffend? Decisions like that should not be left to AI alone. And that's a hill I'm going to die on. It should be more augmentative in some cases, but in some cases, a hard decision needs to be made to say, no, we're not going to even sort of talk to that. So this is sort of an abridged talk version of the talk because I want to leave a lot more time for conversation. So I'm going to sort of speed by things and we sort of anchor on certain things. I'm actually going to do two things. I'm actually going to blend two presentations together hopefully. But before that, let me sort of introduce myself. I'm Noble. I'm in this industry doing machine learning stuff because of these two kids. These two kids are my girls. They're going to grow up AI native, and I want to be a good ancestor for the tools that they're going to interact with, either by their choice or by society's choices. They have no you hear a lot about agents maybe, and we can even dive into and nerd out about that. But agents, like with any emergent technology, could be dangerous. So say, for example, I want to book a birthday party at a restaurant for these two girls, for one of these two girls, and my agent goes out and books it. But one of my requirements are to say, um, you know, I want it to be quiet. Well, agent will take that requirement, a quiet restaurant, and go out and book the restaurant, book the thing. But what it might do to achieve the goal that I gave it and the requirement that I gave it is it will generate just hypothetical, generate, 20 other or n number of other fake personas to block out, to book the place and just leave it with me. So I just show up and it's just me and my daughters. Well, that's great for me. It's bad for the restaurant, and this is hypothetical, right? Like it's bad for the restaurant. It's bad for other patrons that may want to also celebrate. And so it's this sort of a one to many, many to many, many to one kind of thing that these people that are just sort of delivering these tools aren't really thinking through, but we're all talking about agents and everyone's happy. And so I want to be a good ancestor as one example. Like the restaurant is a cheap example, but think about things like hospital, like anything that is sort of life-threatening in the case of that. Well, that's me. What I do on a daily basis is sort of being a full stack product leader, a CPTO of some sort, fractional, with a lot of my clients where we, build what we call machine learning ops pipelines to help, automate the cleaning of data to make sure that it is the right quantity, the right quality, so it's free of biases, which leads me to the second bucket, which is fairness and bias and being able to sort of test models in the same way you test software before you release it. We actually have pre-processing tests that we do if we have access to the data, in-processing tests if we have access to the model, and post-processing tests more for the labels and the inference layer. For explainability is another thing that is under my remit. I handle things like for traditional AI or narrow AI, by the way, interrupt at any point. I hope this is a casual sort of group. But for explainability, for narrow AI, being able to sort of use, libraries to explain the feature importance of a thing, like of the prediction. So why is it that Mary Johnson got denied for this loan, for example? With generative AI these days, that is impossible. Like there's no way for me to get into the brain of this neural network and try to figure it out. So in this remit, I sort of rely heavily on um, uh, uh, Jesus, I blanked out. I rely heavily on uh, what's the word? What's the phrase? Basically, source attribution. That's the phrase. Being able to sort of say have an index within my pipeline, that MLOps pipeline, to sort of index the sources of it's the prediction. And then real quick, data privacy and data risk. I'm part of the red teaming network at OpenAI. And of course, being human-centered with how we interact with these things. That sounds like a lot, but I've been doing this for over 14 years. So I'm going to sort of leave it there, this first question.
So Noble, real quick, right? I mean, you mentioned leveraging generative AI. I wouldn't use generative AI for that particular use case, right? If I'm making a determination like to whether or not I approve or deny a claim, I don't see why I would use generative AI when I can use some sort of, model, a simple model trained on historical data set to be able to tell me what that outcome should be, and then leverage a human in the loop component to verify, based on thresholds. So, for example, I did a live use case here for a healthcare company, right, to determine do I approve a loan or do I deny it. And they said, anything you can accept anything above $500, all below $500, something like that, right? But if you're denying any claim, you do not deny it, and that will be the final conclusion. That needs to go through a human. So any denial of claims go through a human loop for additional review. Approval based on a certain threshold can just be approved to be paid out, right? So, and there was no generative AI even remotely close to being considered for this because it just doesn't fit that use case, right? So, when we say generative AI, there's specific use case for which it is strong in, and specific use case for which you don't even want to use it, right? And in this case, I don't think generative AI is sort of what I would use in this particular use case.
For the loan thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, again, I'm not advocating that you use generative.
Oh, okay.
I hope I didn't say that.
Uh,
Matter of
okay.
fact,
Sorry.
what I meant to say is, believe it or not, people are using just machine learning or generative AI for everything because they've been sold a bill of goods that they too can have their own open AI in their coffers, right?
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I'll just sort of restate what I said. There are some cases where AI isn't at all needed. And that's part of my job to continue with education and sort of helping sitting with boards of companies and sort of executives to dispel this myth that all they need to do is go from data to inference and everything is okay. It does not happen.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Thank you.
No worries. I see. I love what you're saying in terms of people first, human mindset. I love shifting my clients away from artificial intelligence to augmented intelligence. I love that. I might want to use that as well. Thanks, Stan. Um, so I don't want to go on and on about this. I often ask, but just to sort of speed round through these slides because I want to get into the actual conversation. I often ask my teams or my audiences, what was your time to AI this morning? And there's always like, deer in the headlights. Everybody's looking at me. What do you mean by time to AI in the morning? Meaning, and what I mean by that is from when you were dead asleep to when you think you started using an AI when you woke up. What time was it? And it's a trick question because AI is ambient. If you woke up with your phone, you're already using AI. So the point is, if it's to be ambient, if it should be ubiquitous for us and our kids and our grandkids, it better be fair. And it's actually fairness is actually a business need, right? In order to not to increase retention in your solutions. You don't want to alienate a segment of your users. Being able to sort of speak to one of these Alexas and having it not work means I'm not going to use it anymore. But even more serious than that, some of the loan stuff that we were just talking about, if it's sort of if it doesn't explain why it is at the very least explain why it is denying a loan, you will get complaints and you may get into some legal problems. And so the way I look at it is the educational part of my job is to do what I call boom events, prevent boom events, or at least mitigate the potential for a boom event. And a boom event is sort of stole from the Air Force, where they say a catastrophic event. So in the way that I'm talking about with AI, if it's on the internet, you're going to run into a problem, especially if you're collecting and evaluating your models in production, monitoring your models in production. So my job is to be left of boom to help you mitigate a lot of the stuff that you need in order to mitigate or to decrease the likelihood of all of the pain that you have to deal with when that inevitable issues happen there. I'm going to skip this part. It is more the ways that we test for fairness. This is from IBM. This URL does not work anymore. They've changed it. Now, if you just look for AI Fairness 360, it's part of their suite of responsible AI tools. That's what we use. Microsoft has FairLearn for traditional, again, narrow AI. When it comes to generative AI, I'll get to that here in a second. I will go and sort of talk about this slide real quick.
I have just a quick question, and maybe
Yep.
is more of a selfish question here. Um, you know, just a real scenario.
Yes,
Um,
sir.
a an insurance company basically just starting out in the AI journey is basically has four key tentacles. They have an AI engineering group. They have, um, sort of a AI solutions group, which is like their product management team. They also have an applied AI science team, and they have a data strategy and governance, right? Let's assume that you were brought in to kind of mold or shape that, considering that their data is good. They have data lakes, they have centralized data, they know where all the bodies are buried in terms of claims data, adjudication data, and things of that nature. When you come in, if you come in from a strategy and governance perspective, what are the top three things you're going to enact within that organization to ensure that you are sort of maintaining fairness and also setting them up so that they don't get in trouble with, sort of compliance and things of that nature?
Great question. Reviewing or setting up their principles. What does fairness mean to them in their domain? What fairness might mean to a fintech company, even within the same vertical industry, may mean something completely different to a private equity group, right? And so reviewing and or setting up clear principles, clear objectives, and how they want to sort of use the data is sort of that first tentpole. The second would be, I think I talked about explainability. What mechanisms do you have within your organization to interpret the predictions, recommendations, or classifications that your models are making, either real time or near real time? And that's important for three stakeholders. One, your data scientists and your machine learning developers need to be able to debug problems as they come in. So I don't know why organizations don't take the extra legwork to actually put in evals and ways to sort of understand the reasons why these behemoths behave in the way they do. The AI, I call them behemoths, right? Two is the business leaders and compliance, right? And so if there is a boom event, so right of boom, something happens, are you able to go to get with your compliance team and explain that we did what we needed to do with the data that we had? We had a data lake, like you're saying, we had all the bodies in place, and guess what? So did Zillow right before the pandemic. What happened during the pandemic? An anomaly for all sense of the word started happening, and real estate agents weren't operating. They tried to make a pivot with the data that they had and the infrastructure that they had. But guess what? No one had ever seen a pandemic before. They lost billions of dollars because their models, one of their models were misclassifying something. Are they able to sort of explain that to investors, for example? And then the third is actually the user, being able to sort of explain to, Mary Jones or whatever, why they got denied. And for me, that's the same data set. I'm just perhaps using what I do is to use generative AI to leverage the business metadata or the actual metadata and sort of interpret the explanations that are coming out of my models or the source attributions that are coming out of my models and target them for my persona. So either the business, the legal, or the devs, the legal or compliance teams, and of course the user. Then you said three. Then of course, so I talked about whatever. Let me sort of recap here. We talked about principles and setting clear objectives. We talked about explaining
Excellent.
explainability.
What
Uh-huh.
what does fairness mean? I was taking notes. Principles. What does fairness mean? Explainability. What mechanisms do you use to explain for those three personas you talked about? The data scientists, users, and the middle part. I think was the business, right? And
Right.
then lastly is the point that you're about to make right now. What's the third sort of thing?
Yeah. So basically adapting point number one to production. And what I mean by that is, do you have robust monitoring and evaluation mechanisms for production models or inference pipelines that you have running? At any point, as your actual users are interacting with the tools, given the non-deterministic nature of the way these systems work, like I'd be able to ask an AI one type of question 10 different times and get like 20 different answers, right? So given the non-deterministic nature of how these tools work, do I have the hooks and mechanisms to get that feedback flywheel? One mechanism that is sort of tried and true with any kind of software is implicit feedback or explicit feedback. Implicit feedback meaning you're looking at telemetry coming in from how the users are interacting with your tool. For generative AI, you might look at tools like Evidently or I mean, this is you can't throw a rock without hitting an AI monitoring tool. I know LangChain has LangServe or LangGraph or whatever. There are tons of ways to sort of monitor the telemetry coming in. And then for the explicit feedback is you'll notice like when you're using some of these AI tools, if it's implemented properly, you'll see sort of just thumbs up or thumbs down if it's helpful. You can wire that up in order to buttress your definition of fairness and to make sure that you're actually on track and delivering value to your users in a way that doesn't alienate or violate whatever principles that you may have set. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that was great. I think those are things. It absolutely makes sense, and it answers my question. Because where they are in their journey, they're still starting out. So all these things need to be put in place, right?
All right.
And it's a really great conversation. I'm definitely going to ping you to go in depth and maybe a little bit more nuance to it if I'm able to, or if you're open to that, I can definitely ping you up. I was looking forward to your Wednesday chat as well, but yeah, I feel like I need to reach out to you before that and have a more detailed conversation. This is great.
No worries. Hey, and I want to just disappoint everybody here. There is no one definition of fairness. Fairness is just like um this thing that we're just making up as we go along. But luckily, a lot of statisticians and very smart people or above my pay grade have some baselines. And those are those little tests like demographic parity, things, ways to sort of understand that. And the job, going back to your question earlier, Amika, like, is do you even understand what um, fairness means to you? That's like the sort of the first question. Does that involve debiasing your data sets? Hopefully that question is yet, but I want to sort of just land this plane a little bit so that we can get into more conversations. I promised like a blend of two presentations, and Kita, like I'm sorry, like I'm sort of rushing through this, but I think this is important. The first thing is I alluded to, I was just sort of riffing earlier. Love this meme where there's actually more. I love the meme, that's why I'm using it. There's this red herring that maybe not for y'all, but believe it or not, I'm sitting in these rooms and they're like, we have the data. AT&T, not to call them out. I'm sorry if you work for AT&T. I work for one of their many teams that do stuff with towers and stuff. And they wanted to build a propensity model. This has nothing to do with generative AI whatsoever. They came to us with that exact sentiment. We have the data. We have our team are a bunch of data scientists. They know their stuff. Well, guess what? They didn't own the data. The marketing team owned the data, right? The data that they needed to do the propensity measurement, right, on their tools. And so sometimes I go into rooms, and I have to make this. This is not a pitch or anything. I just want to sort of ground this conversation about fairness, bias, and just irregularities with getting these things to production with my experiences, right? I'm not pitching anyone or whatever, is that I heard earlier that, of course, we wouldn't use generative AI for loans, but guess what? Really repeatable companies are looking to do that. And they're bringing me in the room after they hit their head or they get into trouble or something of that sort. So don't be like CEO guy over here. Um, Let me see. Somebody asked about a framework earlier. I don't know whether it was you. let me talk about my
It
framework.
was me. It was a Mecca. It was a Mecca.
Oh,
Yes,
okay, Emeka.
definitely,
Yeah, okay. So
definitely.
this is my framework, and I just want to caveat this framework by first stating that never buy any vendor or if your team comes to you and says, "Hey, we're going to implement this exact framework that I screenshotted from Noble's presentation," run for the hills. Start small. Don't even start with a vector database. I'm going to talk a little bit about retrieval augmented generation. I know y'all would probably roll your eyes because you've heard enough about it. Um, Brothers out here, like development teams out here, are practicing job security driven development. They're making things very, very complex, and it makes it very hard to decompose, debug, and improve. So with that um, preamble, I guess, out of the way, this is my framework. I talked about guardrails before. This is what it looks like. So, Jay, you come in and you ask the system. And by the way, generative AI is more than chatbots. I can go on for the whole year ranting about that, but it's easy to sort of explain because they're sort of low hanging fruit. So I'm going to use a chatbot example. So you go into a health related tool and you ask it a query. You ask it, why is Biden so old? Well, that query cost a lot of money, right? They're traditionally without a guardrail, it's going to talk to an endpoint and it's going to return back something. And that's, if you're using an OpenAI API endpoint, that's, what was it like 4 is like 15 cents for every token coming across or something like that. Don't quote me on that, but it's not cheap. So what we do is we implement a kind of do I have it here? We a kind of guardrail called a dialogue guardrail. There are different kinds of guardrails. As I was talking before.
Noble,
Yes, sir.
this is great. So a lot of team may not be deep in data. Can you explain what a guardrail is?
Yes. This right here is that safety mechanism to do two things, in my view, to help you save money when you are not wanting to have to call your OpenAI endpoint, your Anthropic endpoint, your LLM, your large language model, every single time someone comes and interacts with your tool. So it serves as that. And it also serves as sort of a safety and sort of the canonical meaning of guardrail. It sort of guards your system from potential abuse, right? And so I'm glad you asked that, Keita. So I'm just going to walk through this. So user comes in, asks the system, something irrelevant. Well, you get a response right away. And this can be a conditional, so rule-based, or it can we actually sort of use another like a cheaper LLM to sort of detect and say nope, go back. And we use a tool by NVIDIA called Nemo guardrails to do that. So say it's relevant, right? In the context of retrieval augmented generation, I should have explained retrieval augmented generation before getting into this, Kita. That's another thing that I want to do. There's a lot of jargon in this thing that's very exclusionary. So retrieval augmented generation is three things, as the name says, right? So the retrieval part is literally going into your proprietary data or your private data source or knowledge source and then retrieving information. It's not as trivial as I'm making it sound. There's a lot that goes into it because if I get, let's say, the K1 for my company, and I want to run some analysis on it, for example, well, tables within PDFs are notoriously difficult, right? Like, so there's a lot of strategies that I won't get into right now. So the guardrail here says to an agent, the good use of an agent, to say, okay, this is great. He's good to go. Send it over to the data. So you can use a traditional search mechanism like BM25 and sort of store stuff into a vector database, or you can use semantic search to find the information and rank it up. But the vector database is the one that allows you to sort of return the chunks of relevant data that your user was looking for. And we add indexes. Again, this is over the course of maybe 8 months of continuous iterative testing, explicit feedback, implicit feedback, as I talked before, user-centered in how we do it, agile in how we iterate and learn from our users. There's this flywheel that is happening. And I'll talk about our red and purple teams. There's red teams, there are blue teams, and then there are purple teams. We use purple teams when we're and so. But these indexes are the ways to sort of talk about the thing that I talked about before, which was just source attribution. It's just sort of explainability for the generative AI age, at least until Anthropic and OpenAI cracks something called mechanistic interpretability, which I'm waiting for. Anyway, so there's a feature store that keeps the metadata to make things a little bit more efficient. I won't get into that. It gets dumped into an embedding model, which is embeddings are, just look it up, are perhaps the most important piece of how any of the generative AI stuff works. We evaluate those retrievals. We evaluate for different kinds of bias, statistical bias or geographic bias. I worked with Udacity over the last couple of months to release the refreshed version of the AI Product Manager Nanodegree, and I used geographical bias as the focus of the course, which means if I'm searching for goods, it doesn't return something that is offensive to another group. So, fairness in the West may mean different, or bias in the West may have different ways to interpret in, let's say, if you live in Jordan, for example. So geographic bias is an existing part of topic of bias that we want to sort of evaluate for, just to understand how we're doing. So we talked about retrieval. So now we're augmenting what we've retrieved in order to sort of return it into a format that makes sense. Okay. We then use the LLM, your OpenAI or Anthropic, your Llama, to generate a response back to the user. And it's hopefully free of any defects, any potential bias, because you've gone through the guardrail, you've gone through evaluation, and you're continuously checking, and you return an answer that makes sense. This is another a naive way to do the same thing, and this is where you want to start, right? Just query, have the large language model process that query and send you a response. That's where you start, and not the not the what we call the what did I call it? Job security driven development. I think I might keep using that. All right. So yeah, that's all I wanted to sort of talk about. It's 5:12. I've gone a little over because I was late coming in. I wanted to
So,
at
May
least
I ask
stay
a
off back.
question, sir?
Yeah,
yeah.
questions.
Yes, please. Just because I saw how much you were into the database side, I love that. Thank you, first and foremost. But I wanted to get into the discussion about security implementations. I know you saw what happened with OpenAI recently, and how they were basically like Trojan horse through their own DB, and then from there they got exposed. What are the indicators of the routes to go forward if we're going to try to protect this amount of data? Because it seems like to a hacker, this is heaven on earth if they're able to get access to this much information.
Where do I start answering this question? It's a good question. There are a couple ways to take this one.
Thank you again.
There is a way to sort of tackle security from a robustness of the model to adversarial attacks, which means that assumes that you have control of the language model itself, or if it's not an NLP based thing, let's say you're doing some narrow AI somewhere, traditional machine learning, you have control over the model. There are ways to, again, evaluate how users are interacting with the model in a way that doesn't violate certain policies that you may have in place. This is a very hard question to answer because you couched it from a data standpoint. So I'm going to try a different way to answer it. A lot of organizations that rushed into deploying, and I'm speaking from my personal experience, enterprises that rush to deploying retrieval augmented generation models, which, by the way, I didn't mention, is like becoming sort of the standard way to reduce hallucinations. I think when I joined, y'all were talking about hallucinations. It doesn't eliminate hallucinations. Are there many ways to do it? So these RAGs, right, have your data there. One thing that I noticed that a lot of respected organizations did was to hop right from POC or prototype or MVP to production right away because they saw the value and they didn't want to lose their funding. And so what happened is they forgot traditional software best practices. Again, the model is not the product, right? The data could be the product, but the actual software, the way your users and potential adversaries interact with the tools that you build with the model is the product. And so you have these teams deploy their cool demo that they think is a product. They forget things like role-based access control or attribute-based access control, RBAC, ABAC, if you're familiar, which means anybody in the organization can access all the things, which is bad for HR within the organization, because now I can go look at how much, Tola gets paid, right? Should I have that access? Well, no. Luckily, that gets picked up very quickly because domain experts exist in a lot of those environments. And so another way to answer that question is a point of view and a personal opinion that some of us have been building software for years. This AI magic bullet thing is not software. It's just data that has been transformed and delivered through an API. And so the way you delivered your API or your data products in the past and the security mechanisms that you put in and the guardrails that you put in and what your red teams were looking for, your purple teams were looking for, your blue teams were looking for, those practices still remain the same. The only difficult part is the added complexity. You saw my little framework there. The added complexity that your security teams, your CISOs have to sort of tangle with. It's a solvable problem, but start small, or start simple, and don't rush to prod.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. So just to be clear, I think that sorry, just one last thing. I think what you explained was, a framework to how you build an AI solution, AI product, right? Which is different from the framework for which you sort of govern the actual product itself, right? I think I just want to be clear.
Oh, I see. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, because no, that was good because that information is great. I'm just saying there's a distinction between both, right?
Yeah.
There's the AI governance piece, and then there's the AI solutioning piece. And what you described is how, your framework, the design, sort of, one of the best ways to limit hallucinations, which is the RAG, right, model.
Yep.
So
yeah,
okay, perfect. I just wanted
Fair
to make
point.
that distinction. But thank you.
Here's a framework that may align with what you may have been looking for. So I kind of dumbed it down initially. I talked about principles and objectives. I talked about, that sort of in-proc layer, and then the post-proc layer was monitoring and evaluation. There's another way to look at it. The scope, is very important and sort of ties this entire conversation, at least since I joined, back together. Because you might go through a strategic sort of powwow, set your objectives, and quickly realize that, wait, we shouldn't be using Gen AI at all. This is not a AI problem. And so defining that scope and strategy matters. Understanding your data, it sounds obvious, right? But bruh, like you'll be surprised. Having some sort of governance, not just on the data side. I hear a lot of data governance, but when I say lifecycle governance, I'm talking about the transformed data, right? Like, so the AI part that is being served and what that life cycle is. So I talked about, and this is actually a great callback there, Amika. So it actually sort of brings back what I was talking about with the implicit, explicit feedback and a lot of the stuff that I've talked about today, not just what's happening in the back end, like that other framework that I was talking about.
Yep.
Being able to monitor it, so feedback loops, so in compliance, risk and management. I think I talked about that as well. So this is sort of a way to sort of look at that. I guess I just, I'm beating a dead horse on that one.
Hey, I had a question. Can you address the group and explain what is red teaming? You mentioned some other colors. I had never heard of those actually. So can you explain that?
Yeah.
Red
So
team is hackers, correct? I do
Yeah,
remember hearing about red team, like Red Hat, right? Correct? That's
yeah, I
hackers,
can.
right?
If you
Yeah.
same
want, I
thing.
can.
Gray hat hackers and the same thing. So it's
Yep.
just the focus of that team, right? And you normally see just red teams alone in very mature teams. So we're talking about like some of these either fintech on the New York side or Silicon Valley type companies and startups in between. But it's, red team is more offensive, trying to figure out a way to sort of stop adversaries. Things that, an example that I gave before, which is I could talk about for years with the agents and everyone talking about agents. Well, I use agents, but I don't really use it for the way that, the ways that you'll see Sundar Pichai come on stage at Google I/O and talk about it. We're not ready for that yet. And so your red team sort of look at ways in which someone can offensively violate your principles and objectives that you may have, your definitions based on the strategy that you want to go after. Blue teams are the opposite of that. It's more defensive in that sense. And sort of purple teams are just sort of meshed of both, right? Blue and red.
Just to add to that, if you want, I can jump on that because that's my field of work.
How did I do?
Good. Partially because the red team is the aggressor. Red team is like, say, hackers, but also companies hire red teams to do pen testing to find holes in their systems. They're hired to do that. The blue team, as you say, is a defense. I'm part of blue team, so you find vulnerabilities, you do your pen testing, you do your patches, you do all those things. Purple team is a mesh, like you said, a combination of both. The white team is a governance. Those are the ones who pretty much, like set the rules for pen testing for the red team. Yeah, so that's pretty much what it is.
Hey, Marley, can you explain what pen testing is to the group?
So pen testing is something usually done by a third party. You hire them you can do yearly, quarterly, ideally yearly for penetration testing, meaning that they have a job within a scope and agreed contract with a company. They have to follow certain rules, of course, to attack certain areas of your network. Whether your firewall, your VPNs, your website. If there's any cross-site scripting can happen. If any, let me see, some DNS issues or, but what they are is kind of the red team, and they have a set of specific tools that they use to just like pound your network, within certain parameters set by the higher ups and agreed contracts. So, they give you a report at the end, say, hey, there's a hole in your network, this software is patching, this is deprecated, please change it so you're vulnerable to this. So it's just pretty much a group of people that just are hired to just like brute force your network in any way possible to find holes in it.
Yep.
Spot on. All right, so I guess if there are any more questions, let me know. If not, I can sort of leave y'all with again, I'm the pragmatist in the room, right? Like I'm not like hyping this thing up. Actually, I prefer if you don't deploy AI for all the things, because as I already talked about. This new breed of AI that completely rocked the world in the last, I guess 32 months or so, is based on something called a transformer architecture that Google introduced. And essentially, and again, I just want to precurse this sort of conclusion with everything I'm saying is just off the top of my head. I may get some stuff wrong, but it's just how I interpret it in a way that can explain it to other folks. With the transformer architecture, we invented a calculator for words. All right, follow me on this one. So you know how calculators sort of, you input a value and you got, input a number, you got the answer. So we essentially, with transformer architecture, we invented calculators for words. And we did that for words with math, something called matrix multiplication. And that's all that's happening with any neural network or any AI, right? So we invented a calculator for words using math, but we quickly learned that language is nuanced. Language is hard. Paul Grice, who was a linguist and a philosopher in the 60s and 70s, had these maxims in how to understand the types of communication that humans have with each other, just to emphasize the point that language is hard. We quickly learned that the nuances of language and the complexity that we're dealing with, where no amount of matrix multiplication can reliably solve. And so we have these hallucinations and unreliability issues, yet we continue to use it. My personal opinion is that if OpenAI was really all about safety, I'm picking on OpenAI because they, even though I'm contracted there, how do I say this? If they're really concerned about safety, they would have pitched and marketed these chatbots and LLM, large language model based tools, as creative tools, because the hallucinations are actually a feature of non-deterministic systems and not a bug, right? And so, but unfortunately, cat's out of the bag, and we have to do these complex pipelines in order to sort of rein it in. And so that's where I'm sort of going to lead you, balancing bias and reining in the accuracy of these systems is perhaps one of the most complex topics that we have to deal with our time. I don't really care about existential risk. Someone smarter than me is going to figure that out. I just care about how we can protect users today, short term, from using these tools and helping them use these tools responsibly. Tola.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I'm only asking this question because I seen the photo with you and your kids, so I can tell you're already planning for the future of what AI is as you see it is today and what it's going to be. And that's where my question is actually going to be a narrative around. So you talked about generative AI as being nothing but a subset of basically machine learning tools. What will be our role in the future of what AI is to become? Or are we already there, sir?
Oh man, that's a good question. What is our role in what AI is to become?
Hey, Tola, I think there's some feedback on your line. Can you mute
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Thank you.
first?
Our role should be informed, right? We need to be informed with how these things work. We need to keep market pressure on these organizations that are selling a bill of goods towards a potential artificial super intelligence, general intelligence future that has no real definition. We need to keep them honest. That's the second answer. That's the second part of that answer. Our role is to acknowledge that we are not perfect. Humans aren't perfect, and left unchecked, we propagate our own biases in the models that we train. That we already introduce bias into the process to improve performance, accuracy, and optimizing for error, depending on the objective function that we care about. And then putting in some of the best practices that I may talk about, or that we're individuals, right? We work at companies that want to deploy AI. And so being able to sort of go in, on Tuesday, tomorrow, and being able to sort of, hopefully you have a voice in the room to help the decision makers make, if you're not one, I assume you are, make those hard trade-offs. Because, asking questions just because we can doesn't mean should we, those kind of questions, so that we're not bringing in disproportionate product failure, representational harm, opportunity denial to groups or individuals. My daughter, when Midjourney, this generative AI for images thing came out, I was watching her use it, and she loves anime, so she just searched very terrible prompt. She types a picture of a beautiful woman, and she saw a beautiful woman. It's a white lady with the thing, and she continued chatting. It's like, well, I'm like blackety black, like I'm like, beautiful woman. When you search again, like, you're black. You should search for, just try to qualify it and make it more black. She's like, no, I like this one, which is fine. I'm not saying a white lady standing by, an ocean or whatever, the beach or whatever, which is what she got, was bad. But she's biased in her understanding of what a beautiful woman is, good or bad. I'm not, whether it's a black woman, that she should still be biased, is my point. And so we are what was, right? Like there's just some systemic things that sort of make us, the individuals, part of what one might call the problem. Right. So being able to be informed, sorry for this long verbose answer, but like being able to be informed that I want to bias, there's good bias. I want to bias the system to give me the result that I want, that I need, is something that has become my life's mission. And anyone like this group invites me to talk, I'll talk for an hour, I'll talk for 5. And hopefully truthfully and factually, in order to help us understand that the bias starts from us.
Thank you for that answer, sir.
Hey, thank you so much, Noble, for coming by, sharing your insights, and spending so much time with us. We really appreciate what you're doing here. If people want to contact you, do you I gave them your LinkedIn link. Do you have any other ways that people can reach you?
LinkedIn is great. Y'all, I'm trying to do this education stuff on YouTube, but I don't know how to YouTube. So y'all join my YouTube.
I also share your YouTube channel, so yeah.
I appreciate you, man. Just go to the YouTube thing, subscribe to it. I talk about like things that annoy me. I go in and I rant. If you disagree, like if I misrepresent what a red team is, Marley, just go in and just check me out, and I'll shout you out. And I'd love to get y'all on the guest as well.
We don't know everything. No one knows everything.
Exactly.
So,
we're all learning, right?
Exactly.
This is how to get to my LinkedIn, because there's some crazies out there.
Oh yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much, Noble, man. And everyone, this will end the session for today. We'll see you next week. Everyone have a great rest of the week. Talk to you later.
All right.
All
right. Thank you,
everybody.
gentlemen. All right.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you, Noble.
Thanks.